"You can't fly with US." The airport was buzzing with voices, engines, and rolling suitcases, but two voices had gone quiet: Jasmine and Jada, twin black girls standing side by side in front of Gate 14 with crisp boarding passes in their hands, matching braided hair and matching denim jackets that said future leaders on the back. They had every reason to feel proud, excited, maybe even a little nervous. It was their first flight alone across the country to attend a youth leadership summit in San Diego, sponsored by their school and backed by a non-profit that believed in young minds ready to change the world. But all that confidence was draining fast, replaced by confusion and a sick feeling that something was off, something cold and wrong. That had nothing to do with weather or delays or any reason that made sense. They had arrived early, cleared security, smiled politely at every checkpoint. Their documents were in perfect order, their seats confirmed, their bags already tossed onto the conveyor belt, heading toward the same plane that now stood outside the window, sleek and silver like a promise, ready to carry dreams at 35,000 feet. But somehow they weren't allowed to board. The gate agent, a middle-aged woman with tightly pinned hair and a name tag that read Melinda, barely looked up when they approached. Instead, she glanced at the computer screen, then back at them, and said flatly, without warmth or curiosity or even real eye contact, "There's a flag on your reservation. You'll need to step aside." "Day flag," Jasmine repeated, trying to stay calm. "We're students. We're going to a conference. We have our IDs and school letters right here. We're not You need to wait over there," Melinda said, pointing with a quick motion like flicking away something that didn't belong. She already turned her attention to the next person in line, a businessman who smiled and was waved through without a pause. Jada touched Jasmine's wrist and whispered, "Let's just breathe. Maybe it's a glitch. Maybe they'll clear it in a second." But the second turned into 10 minutes, then 20, then 40, as passengers filed past them and boarded one by one. Some stared, some ignored them entirely, and one woman clutched her purse tighter as she passed, like she was scared of what exactly. Two teenage girls in matching jackets, who had done nothing more than exist in a space that suddenly felt like it didn't want them. Jasmine went back up to the counter again, her voice more fragile this time. "Ma'am, our flight is about to leave, and we're still not on the list. Can you please check?" Again, Melinda didn't even bother hiding the annoyance. This time she leaned forward with a sigh. "I already told you, there's a flag. We can't let you board. I don't make the rules. You'll need to wait for security to clear it. And no, I don't know when that'll be now. Please step back." Jada's hands curled into fists. She could feel the heat rising in her chest. Not just frustration, but something deeper, something that felt like shame, even though she'd done nothing wrong. And it was that unfairness that hurt more than the delay, more than missing the flight. Even the way the staff behind the counter exchanged glances, and one of them, a younger girl with a headset and heavy eyeliner, giggled under her breath and whispered something to the other, who smirked and nodded. "Yeah, they're definitely troubleware, not criminals," Jada said loud enough for them to hear. "We're students. We're on a roll. We volunteered to teach younger kids robotics last summer, and we raised money for food banks, and none of that seemed to matter. Not in this place. Not in this moment." Jasmine's hands were shaking now, and she pulled out her phone, scrolling to her contacts, her finger hovering over the name that she never used lightly. "Daddy, or calling him Jada?" asked wide-eyed. "We didn't even tell them who he is," Jasmine said softly. "Maybe we should have thousands of miles away." Damian Cole sat at the head of a long mahogany table in a skyscraper boardroom, dressed in a sharp navy suit, surrounded by executives waiting for his next sentence, when his phone buzzed once. Then again he almost let it go to voicemail. But when he saw Jasmine's name, something inside him paused, something cold and protective and older than time. He excused himself with a nod, walked out to the floor-to-ceiling windows, and answered with a calm smile. "Hey sweetheart, you girls on the plane yet?" There was silence, then a shaky breath, then Jasmine's voice. "Daddy, they wouldn't let us on." "What do you mean?" he asked slowly, eyes narrowing. "What happened?" "They said there was a flag. No reason, no explanation. They made us stand to the side, and then they closed the gate, and the plane left without." Ustamian's whole body went still, like someone flipped a switch and turned him to ice. "Which airline?" he asked, already pulling up his private contact list. She told him, and he said, "Stay there. Don't move. I'll handle." "I've hung up the board meeting." "Forgotten." Damian dialed straight into the executive branch of Airlines, not customer service, not regional management. No, he went straight to the senior vice president, someone He had met in person someone who had shaken his hand and smiled at the gala last year. Because Damien wasn't just a father or a businessman or a wealthy donor. He was the CEO of one of the largest private logistics tech firms in the country, and Airlux used his company to power their cargo tracking systems across every major flight path. He spoke slowly, calmly, like a surgeon with a blade. 2 of your employees denied boarding to my daughters at Gate 14 JFK. They are 17, they are black, and they were traveling with all approved documentation. They were not given a reason. I want names, I want footage, and I want a full shutdown until I receive answers. The voice on the other end tried to explain, tried to delay, but Damien interrupted. If my daughters aren't personally apologized to in the next 30 minutes, every software license my firm supplies, your airline will be suspended. And if you think I'm bluffing, ask your CFO what that means for your shipment contracts in Q3 back. At the terminal, Jasmine and Jada sat on a cold bench near the wall, still dressed in hope and disbelief. Jasmine stared at her screen, waiting. Jada rubbed her face, trying not to cry in public, maybe even doubting for a moment that her father could actually do anything about it. Then everything changed. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. The gate agent's phone rang, and Melinda picked it up, her face changing slowly from bored to surprised to pale. She nodded furiously. Yes, sir. Yes, I understand. Yes, right away. Moment later, a man in a dark suit and badge rushed in from the executive wing. His name tag said Randall Watson, Regional Director. He walked straight to the twins with something like panic in his voice. Miss Jasmine, Miss Jada, on behalf of Airlux, I sincerely apologize for this error. We will arrange immediate first-class seats on the next flight, complimentary services and compensation, and an internal review is already underway. They stared at him, unsure what to say, unsure what they were even looking at, until the next moment, when another announcement echoed through the terminal. Attention passengers, all remaining Airlux flights out of JFK have been temporarily delayed. Please stand by for update. Buzzed heads turned. A collective wave of confusion spread across the boarding area, and Melinda, the same woman who dismissed them earlier, now stood completely still, sweat forming on her forehead, as a corporate escort approached her and whispered something that made her legs shake. What just happened? Jada whispered, eyes wide, as sources. Jasmine let out a slow breath. Dad happened, and they hadn't even seen the real storm yet. FLEGHTGROUND. The ripple effect started small, a confused voice here, a whispered question there, but within minutes the entire terminal pulsed with uneased screens. Updated flights flickered from green to red, boarding times delayed without warning. Agents began pacing between gates, phones glued to their ears, while nervous travelers clutched their carry-ons and checked apps that offered no answers. The twins sat still, watching it all unfold, like a movie written just for them. Jada leaned toward Jasmine, her voice low and cautious. I think Dad just froze the whole airport. Jasmine nodded slowly, though her mind was racing faster than any departing plane. She could feel it, the shift, the fear, the realization spreading among the staff that someone, somewhere, had pulled a very large lever, and the machine they thought could not be stopped was now wheezing and grinding to a halt, not because of a terrorist or weather or technical error, but because 2 girls in matching jackets had been disrespected, and one phone call had awakened a Watson, the regional director who had rushed over just minutes before, now stood on his phone near the corner, speaking so fast it was hard to tell where his sentences began or ended. He kept glancing toward the twins, his forehead slick with sweat, his mouth drawn into a permanent frown. Behind him, Melinda, the gate agent, looked like she had aged 10 years. Her stiff posture now slumped, her hands trembling as she clutched her headset, trying to listen to 2 people speaking in her ear, while pretending not to hear the whispers around her. She was being watched, recorded. One passenger had already begun live streaming on social media, tagging the airline with captions like "Twin girls denied boarding," and now the whole airline is melting down. Jasmine and Jada said nothing, but their silence felt heavier than screams. It held shame and power at the same time. Randall finally walked back over with forced confidence and a clipboard in hand. Ladies, we have arranged 2 seats for you in first class, leaving in 90 minutes. We have also secured hotel vouchers, meal passes, and travel assistance to help with anything else you may need during this unfortunate inconvenience. He smiled, though it didn't touch his eyes, his voice flat like he was reading off a script. Jada didn't respond. Jasmine stared directly into his eyes, Why weren't we allowed on the plane? Randall blinked, looked down, then quickly answered. There was a system alert. Random. Security protocol. We're still reviewing it. Jada raised her eyebrow. Random security protocol, only for two 17-year-old girls with student IDs and school travel letters, she said. We weren't even asked any questions. You just sidelined us and let the plane go. Randall shifted on his feet again, as if trying to escape his own shoes. You understand how it may have appeared, and we're looking into the issue, and we will ensure it never happens again. It already happened, Jada said, her voice shaking with held-back anger, her fingers tightening around the strap of her backpack. And all we want is the truth, because this isn't the first time something like this has happened to people who look like us, and it won't be the last if nobody says anything. Before Randall could answer, his phone buzzed again. He looked at the screen and his face went pale. He turned his back, walked away, and began muttering into the receiver like he was explaining himself to someone far more powerful than the two girls he had just tried to pacify. Across the city in the Airlux executive tower, chaos was brewing. Damien Cole had not stopped with one phone call after hanging up. He had instructed his legal team to begin drafting a formal notice of contract review and ordered his PR strategist to prepare a statement in case media caught wind of the incident, and they would, because he had also tipped off a well-known journalist from a national outlet with a vague sentence that read something unjust happened today and it's about to come to light. And now the clock was ticking. Inside the Airlux crisis room, for senior directors huddled around a screen, watching live footage from JFK Gate 14. One of them pointed toward the stream of comments flooding the airline's social media. Another handed over a sheet of paper detailing the contract value Airlux currently held with Damien's logistics firm, and the penalties outlined for breach or termination. The numbers were not small, and the consequences not vague, sir. We've confirmed the flag was manually added by a junior employee, said one director, her hands shaking. It wasn't even a security issue. She clicked something under internal note by accident, and it was never cleared. Before Chickenzo, why didn't the staff verify it and board the passengers? The director hesitated. Because they didn't care, sir. They just assumed it was true based on appearance. That single sentence hung in the air, heavy and damning, and it was. All caught on surveillance, all recorded, all time-stamped, every smirk, every whispered word from behind the counter, preserved in crystal clarity. And now the legal team knew it, the PR team knew it, and most importantly, Damien knew it. Back at JFK, a man in a dark tailored suit stepped through the terminal, security escorted, and wearing a badge that read, External Oversight Lead. His name was Marcus Hale, and his job was to investigate and report incidents exactly like this. He approached the twins with calm authority, introduced himself, and asked if they would be willing to speak for the record. Jasmine looked at Jada and nodded softly. They recounted everything: the arrival, the wait, the denial, the comments, the laughter, the silence, the feeling of being invisible, and yet too visible all at once. Hale took notes, nodded occasionally, asked clarifying questions, and promised them their statements would go directly to the airline board for full review. He didn't try to explain it away or soften the facts. He simply listened, and that in itself felt like something rare. By now word had spread across the terminal. Passengers whispered, pointed phones, flashed photos, snapped. Strangers approached them to say they had seen it all and were sorry. Some offered support, some just shook their heads in shame and disbelief that in 2025 this still happened over and over again to young black travelers who did everything right and still weren't seen as enough. Then Jasmine's phone buzzed again. It was her father, a message, this time short and clear. Check Twitter. She opened the app and gasped at the headline trending across the top. TWIN. Teens denied boarding by Airlux. CEO responds in real time. She clicked, and there it was. A video of Damien speaking from his office, a calm, measured, powerful voice echoing across thousands of screens. Today, my daughters were denied a seat on a plane. They had every right to board, not because of a system error, not because of safety, but because someone made a judgment based on how they look. This is not the first time, and I am speaking now not only as a father, but as a man who will no longer stay silent in the face of systemic failure. Accountability must happen, and it will start now. The video had millions of views, and counting. The replies filled with outrage, support, and shock. Jada looked around, and for the first time since that morning, she didn't feel powerless. She felt seen. And Randall came back over red-faced, breathing heavy. We are issuing a formal apology from the airline and launching a full investigation. We are deeply sorry for how you were treated, and I assure you, steps are being taken. Steps, Jasmine repeated, or consequences. He didn't answer, but his silence said more than his words ever could. The gate area was quiet. Now most flights grounded, conversations hushed. The energy shifted like the building itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Somewhere far above in the airlocks tower, the CEO stared at the screen showing the faces of Jasmine and Jada, and finally understood that some people may look small but carry storms behind their smiles, and this storm had only just begun. Storm in the skies. The silence at gate 14 felt unnatural, like the air had thickened around everyone, and every step, every breath, every glance was heavier than before. Even the hum of the announcement speakers had stopped, as if the system itself was holding its voice in the wake of what had just unfolded. Jasmine and Jada sat back in their seats, their eyes scanning the terminal, not out of fear but awareness. Something had shifted around them. People who once ignored them were now watching with quiet admiration. Some smiled and nodded in support. A few even came over to say how proud they were that the girls stood their ground and shared their truth. But the twins were not celebrating, because deep down they knew this was not over. On the runway, planes remained frozen like giant sleeping creatures waiting to be awakened, and inside the control towers, managers argued with legal advisors, corporate offices debated PR responses, and across social media the flame continued to spread. Hundreds of thousands of voices demanded action, demanded resignations, demanded to know how to black girls trying to attend a youth conference could be pushed aside and humiliated in front of a crowd without reason. At the top floor of Airlux headquarters, the board had convened in an emergency session. The CEO, Harold Kessler, a man known for his sharp suits and sharper temper, sat at the head of the table, his jaw-tight eyes fixed on the screen displaying the trending storm. The room was filled with tense silence as the head of legal cleared her throat and began to speak. With all due respect, sir, the longer we delay an official response, the worse this becomes. Our silence implies guilt, and the father of the girls has already gone public. Harold waved her off. We are not reacting based on internet mobs. We are a billion-dollar airline, not a high school caught in a scandal. Another voice cut in, this time from the director of operations. The father is not just a parent, he is the CEO of Coltrack Global. Our entire logistics backbone runs on his system. If he pulls support, every shipment, every luggage scan, every live cargo tracker goes blind. We are talking about potential losses in the hundreds of millions. Within days, Harold slammed a fist on the table. So what you want me to apologize, beg for forgiveness, offer those girls a lifetime supply of frequent flyer miles? No. One answered, because no one needed to. His sarcasm only exposed how much he didn't understand the gravity of the moment. Back at JFK, a security detail approached Jasmine and Jada, offering to escort them to a private lounge. The airline wanted to make amends, or at least appear like they were doing so. The girls followed reluctantly, their footsteps echoing down the terminal, until they were led into a quiet room with velvet chairs, bottled water, and a woman in a gray suit holding a clipboard. Her name was Linda Monroe, Vice President of Customer Experience. She stood when they entered, her smile tight and practiced as she extended her hand. Jasmine hesitated, then shook it slowly. Jada crossed her arms and stayed silent. Thank you for coming, Linda began. I want to personally apologize on behalf of Airlux. We are deeply sorry for the experience you endured today, and we take full responsibility for the actions of our staff. Do you even know their names? Jada asked, cutting through the rehearsed tone with a blade of truth. The woman blinked, caught off guard. While we are in the process of identifying who was involved, and appropriate measures will be taken. Mean fired, Jasmine said softly, but her voice carried weight. Because we already know what they said and did, and we know there's footage, and you're only here because people are watching, not because you care. Linda opened her mouth, then closed it again. She sat down, her posture shifting slightly, the script unraveling before her eyes. What can we do to make this right? She asked, finally, not as a corporate officer, but as a woman realizing she had lost control of the room. Jada stared at her for a long moment, then said, you can start by telling the truth, not just to us, but to everyone. At that moment, the door opened, and Marcus Hale, the external oversight officer, stepped in with another official trailing behind him, and in his hands he held a tablet playing the video feed from earlier. The footage showed the girls standing calmly, presenting their papers. The dismissive wave from Melinda, the whispered laughter, the rolling eyes, the moment the flight door closed behind the last passenger, without even acknowledging them, the second official, who introduced himself as part of the Civil Rights Compliance Division, turned to the girls and said, "This is being reviewed by the Federal Board for potential discrimination findings. You have every right to press charges or request a federal inquiry." The girls exchanged a look. This wasn't just about them anymore. This was a doorway opening into a much larger room filled with shadows that needed light. Meanwhile, Damian Cole stood before a wall of cameras, his media team broadcasting live as he addressed the press in a steady voice. "What happened today is not just a mistake, it is a reflection of unchecked bias in the systems we trust our families, our safety, and our dignity with. We demand transparency, accountability, and more than just another apology." The video reached 1 million viewers in less than an hour, and the pressure-crushed air looks like a falling ceiling. Exploded protesters began organizing at local hubs. Employees leaked internal memos showing similar past incidents that were quietly buried, now rising like ghosts. With receipts, Harold Kessler stood in his office, staring out at the city lights, knowing the board was already voting on his removal, and deep down he knew he had lost not just a battle, but the trust of the public and the loyalty of partners who would no longer protect him from the truth. Back in the lounge, Jasmine's phone buzzed. Again, this time a message from a journalist who wanted to interview them for a national segment. Jada's eyes scanned the room, and she said quietly, "You know what scares them the most? It's not just our father, or the press, or the outrage. It's the fact that we didn't back down. We stood here, we waited, we spoke, and now everyone's watching." Jasmine nodded, her hand still gripping her phone, her heart still beating fast, but her voice steady. "This isn't just our story anymore. It's bigger, and we need to finish what we started." Linda looked at them, the shame on her face no longer hidden, and Marcus Hale said, "When you're ready, we can take your statement and begin filing the formal case." The twins stood together, not as victims, but as voices, and outside the lounge, the world waited to hear what they would say next. Chi power of TRUT. The sun had started to dip behind the skyline as the twins walked down the long hallway of the airport, their footsteps slow, but full of meaning, their faces calm, but their hearts carrying the weight of something that had grown bigger than just a delay or denial. Something that now lived in headlines, in live streams, in the hearts of people who saw their faces and said, "Finally, someone is standing up for what we all feel." Jasmine held her phone in one hand, her other arm linked with Jada, as they approached the conference room where Marcus Hale waited with the federal compliance officer. Cameras had been set up, lights positioned, and 2 microphones sat across from each other on a polished table. The room had been reserved for internal debriefings, but today it would become something more. Marcus stood when they entered, his voice respectful. "We are ready when you are, and everything is off the record until you say otherwise." Jasmine and Jada nodded slowly, took their seats, and adjusted the microphones. They looked at each other, and then Jasmine spoke first, her voice strong and clear. "We just wanted to go to a conference, that's all. Just get on a plane like anyone else, but instead we were treated like a threat, ignored, laughed at, denied for no reason, except that someone made a judgment before we even said a word." Jada picked up where her sister left off, "And when we asked why, they wouldn't tell us. When we asked for answers, they acted like we didn't deserve them." The compliance officer took notes, silently watching with a neutral expression, but there was something in his eyes, something like respect, that grew with each word the girls shared. They told everything from the first moment at the counter to the silence that followed, the whispers, the glances, the way even strangers nearby felt the tension, but said nothing until the plane was gone, and so were their chances. Leaned forward and asked calmly, "Would you be willing to have this shared publicly as part of the investigation? Because if you choose that route, it will reach national review and likely reshape internal procedures across every major airline." Paused, thinking about the weight of that choice, and then she said slowly, "If it helps the next kid not feel like we did, then yes. We want our story out there, all of it, not just for us, but for every time this happened and no one believed them." Meanwhile, across the city, Harold Kessler stood alone in his office, watching the votes come in one after another. The boardroom was filled with tension and sharp whispers, but the verdict was already clear. His tenure as CEO was over. The screen blinked, and then locked with a final message of removal, effective immediately. At the same time, the company released an official statement acknowledging failure, apologizing publicly, and confirming that all involved staff had been suspended pending further review. News stations picked up the updates within seconds. Reporters gathered outside the Airlux building, interviewing employees, shareholders, and anyone with an opinion, and nearly all of them agreed the damage had been coming for a long time. This was just the spark that lit everything at JFK. Jasmine and Jada were escorted through the terminal again, but this time it was different. The same hallways where they had once been invisible now echoed with voices of travelers, clapping people, stepping aside, not out of fear but out of respect. Even a few airline employees gave them quiet nods as they passed their new flight, awaited at a private gate, already cleared with fresh boarding passes and new seats in a class reserved for executive clients. They sat near the window waiting to board. Jasmine scrolled through her phone and saw messages flooding in celebrities, activists, teachers, even other teens from different cities, saying thank you for standing up for us, thank you for showing us how to use our voices. She turned to Jada and whispered, "Can you believe this is all real?" Jada smiled just a little and said maybe it was supposed to be maybe. This was always bigger than just as suddenly a man in a blue uniform approached them, his face serious but kind. He introduced himself as Aaron Fields, lead pilot for their flight, and said softly, "I read what happened, and I just want you to know, I'm proud of you both. We're going to make sure you get where you need to go safely, and with the dignity you always deserved." The plane boarded smoothly, no confusion, no glances, no delays. Just a smooth walk into a cabin where the crew greeted them by name and offered anything they needed. The seats were wide, the windows clean, and the sky outside slowly turned gold as the engines hummed to life. As they buckled their seatbelts and settled in, Jasmine turned to her sister and whispered, "I think something big just changed, not just here but everywhere." Jada nodded, watching the clouds outside, and said, "Yeah, but the fight's not over yet, it's just beginning." And in that moment, they both knew this was no longer a story about two girls who missed a flight. It was about every unseen voice that was now ready to rise, every injustice that had been swallowed now screaming to be heard, every child, every mother, every stranger who would no longer accept silence as the price for peace. Engines roared, the wheels lifted, and the plane soared into the sky, carrying with it not just passengers but a promise that truth, no matter how long it takes, will always rise. THT Nation LISTNS. The flight touched down in San Diego just after sunset, the city bathed in warm golden tones. The conference staff was waiting at the gate, their faces lighting up when they saw the twins arriving, not just as participants but now as symbols of something far larger than a school trip. The director, a tall woman named Miss Ramona, opened her arms and pulled both girls into a hug, her voice tight with emotion. "I saw everything. I watched the live stream, the interviews. You two just changed the conversation across this country, and maybe even beyond." Jasmine and Jada were exhausted but awake in a way they had never felt before, their limbs heavy, but their minds electric. They were escorted through the airport, not with suspicion this time, but with care, their bags already collected, their hotel transport waiting, and a crowd of local reporters gathered outside the Terminal 1, even held up a sign that said, "We stand with the twins for the first time since that awful morning at JFK." Jasmine felt like she could finally breathe in peace, but peace was not what awaited them in San Diego, not yet, not while the world still had questions and the truth had more layers to unfold. The hotel lobby was packed with flashing cameras and microphones. Their names were on every major outlet. Late-night talk shows discussed them, civil rights organizations released statements, celebrities posted their photos and offered support. Someone even started a scholarship fund in their name, and within hours it passed the first 100,000 in donations. That night the twins were invited to speak on a national news panel airing live coast to coast, seated beside professors, airline executives, and legal analysts. They were the youngest voices on screen, but also the most powerful. Every word spoken by Jasmine or Jada came not from notes or training but from lived experience and raw honesty. When the host asked Jasmine how she stayed calm during the incident, she replied softly, "Because we've been taught our whole lives to stay calm even when we're being treated unfairly, because if we speak too loud, we become the problem. If we cry, we're dramatic. If we question authority, we're labeled difficult. So we learn to endure silently, but not anymore. Not today." The room fell into silence. The host nodded and asked Jada what justice would look like to her. Jada answered without hesitation, "Justice means no other Black child has to look over their shoulder before boarding a plane, or walking into a store, or applying for a job. It means people in power taking responsibility not just when they get caught, but before that. It means treating dignity as a default, not a reward. That clip alone was shared over 5 million times in 24 hours. Hashtags filled every trending space. Students walked out in solidarity, entire schools played the interview during morning announcements, and lawmakers took notice. One senator even requested to meet the girls in Washington and propose a bill mandating mandatory anti-bias training for all airline employees across the country. Back in New York, the former CEO, Harold Kessler, tried to issue a second apology, but the public no longer cared to listen. He had become the symbol of silent prejudice, of indifference, of arrogance, and the board of airlocks was scrambling to stabilize stock prices as boycotts spread and rival airlines issued their own pledges to improve systems. Meanwhile, Damian Cole received an invitation to speak at an international summit on corporate accountability and fatherhood in modern leadership. He almost declined, but Jasmine encouraged him, saying, "Dad, your voice opened this door now. Use it to open others." The next day at the youth conference, the twins finally joined their peers, the ones who had arrived without incident, without questions, without being sidelined, and they were greeted with applause. Students from across the country stood and clapped, not just for what they had endured, but for how they responded with courage, clarity, and grace. During the closing ceremony, Jasmine and Jada were asked to give the keynote address, a spot originally reserved for a guest speaker who had stepped aside after seeing what they had to say would matter more than anything he could offer. They stood on stage, hand in hand, facing hundreds of teens who looked like them, and also many who didn't, but all who understood something had shifted in that airport, something small that turned massive, because truth has gravity, and once it starts to fall, it pulls everything around it into motion. Jasmine began, "We didn't ask for this spotlight. We just wanted to fly, go to a conference, maybe learn something new. But what we learned was that injustice doesn't need to be loud. Sometimes it hides behind silence, behind protocol, behind routine, and it takes someone speaking up to break it open." Jada continued, "And we're not perfect. We were scared, we cried, we doubted ourselves, but we knew that silence would not protect us. And when we spoke, we found that millions of voices were ready to rise with us." The crowd rose to their feet, the claps rolling like thunder, and it was more than applause. It was a declaration that this moment belonged to everyone who had ever been dismissed, doubted, disrespected, and told to wait in the corner while life moved on without them. That evening, the twins sat on their hotel balcony, staring out at the lights of San Diego, the ocean breeze brushing against their cheeks, neither of them speaking for a long time, just sitting in quiet reflection of how quickly a day can become a story, how a flight can become a fight, how two girls can become something greater than what they imagined. Finally, Jasmine said softly, "You think it's over now?" Jada shook her head. "No. Not over, just starting, because change doesn't happen in headlines. It happens when people decide they're done being quiet." And somewhere in that moment, they made a silent promise to themselves and to every kid watching to never go back to silence, to never let power hide behind policies, and to always, always speak, even if their voices shook. A voice that changed. EVR White Archie 3. Months later, the story still echoed across cities, classrooms, and courtrooms. What began as two teenage girls being denied a seat on a flight had grown into a national awakening. New training programs were launched across all major airlines, mandatory recordings of passenger interactions were implemented, and internal bias protocols were redesigned, not because of pressure alone, but because the old ways were no longer tolerated, not by the public, not by lawmakers, and certainly not by the youth. Jasmine and Jada sat inside a warm, sunlit office in Washington, D.C., facing a panel of senators and education leaders, invited to speak about their experience and help shape future policy. They wore modest suits, their braids neatly done, their expressions calm, yet fierce. They were not victims, and they made sure no one treated them as such. They were change, and they had earned every inch of the respect that now surrounded them. Senator Alvarez leaned into the microphone and asked, "Jasmine, what advice would you give to other young people who face silent discrimination? The kind that isn't always caught on camera?" Answered without hesitation, "Trust your truth, even when it shakes, even when no one believes you yet. Your story matters, and when you speak, someone will listen, and when you stand, someone will rise with you." Jada followed and added, "Our power is not in being perfect, it's in not being silent. Speak. Even if your voice cracks, speak. Even if you think no one cares, speak because you are not alone. The room filled with quiet, then applause, the kind that comes from understanding, not just agreement. And the officials present nodded, not just in respect, but in realization that these two girls had done what many adults had failed to do. They held the system accountable, without fear, without hate, and without giving up their grace. Later that evening, Damien stood on stage at a global summit, sharing his journey not just as a CEO, but as a father, his voice steady as he described the moment he answered that call from his daughter, the moment he realized that his power, his connections, his money meant nothing if he did not use them to protect and uplift those without them. And as he spoke, many other leaders listened, not just to his words, but to his example. Berlin, New York, the former staff members involved in the denial case had all been dismissed, their internal chats used as evidence during ethics hearings, and Melinda, the agent who had first waved the girls away, released her own public apology, not because she had to, but because she had watched the girls on television and realized what she had done was not just a mistake, but a mirror held up to her own bias. Meanwhile, schools across the country began adding new programs on civic courage and digital justice, using the twins' story as a case study on how small actions can ripple into massive waves, how ordinary voices can become extraordinary symbols. And still, Jasmine and Jada remained humble. They returned to school, finished their senior year, graduated with honors, and continued applying for scholarships, though many had already been offered to them unsolicited, because what mattered more than recognition was direction. They knew now more than ever that their path was not just about achievement, it was about responsibility. One day, as they walked through their neighborhood park, children ran up to them asking, "Are you the girls from the plane? You're so brave." And the twins knelt down, smiled, and said, "We were just doing what needed to be done." And so can you never forget that as summer came, the sisters prepared for college, each accepted into top universities with plans to study law and public policy. And though the future stretched long and unknown before them, one thing was certain: they would never again allow silence to be the final answer, and they would never let injustice go unchecked, not while they had breath and strength and the will to stand. That flight they never boarded had become the moment that launched them not into the sky, but into something far greater. And as the nation continued to grow from their courage, the names Jasmine and Jada became known not just as twin girls denied a seat, but as two young women who stood up and made the world listen. And somewhere high above the clouds, where dreams are born and stories take flight, the truth they carried still saw at the end.